It's story time. 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 All right, we are back for episode 11 of Journey Through PEI. Last time we were talking about the Mind Palace, this effort to construct a organized place to reside, mentally speaking, so that could be the place you can always come back to in your mind as you explore the outside world. If you haven't seen episode 10, I would go and watch that. I'm going to stop putting previous pieces for these episodes just because it's taking a lot for my display capture to, load everything. Because these images are very detailed and I have to have larger file canvas capacity to showcase that. So if you ever get confused by any references that I must make while I'm talking about this piece, go back and listen to the Mind Palace episode 10, and you'll understand what person or archetype I'm referring to or I'm alluding to when I talk about what is inside the mind of that person. Before we go into the random question and answer segment and the art pun segment, I wanted to thank anyone that is joining me for this. I really do appreciate the reoccurring company that you guys are blessing me with. I'm doing this primarily for myself so that I know better what my work is about on a verbal level, something I don't think much about, or I only think but I don't actually express. And I'm hoping to practice or do this as a form of practice so that somewhere down the line I have the hang of assembling the words that best describe the pictures that I'm assembling. I want this hopefully a unison. So the fact that anyone's here coming back for the continuation of this journey, I do appreciate you being here, and I hope that you guys can continue to tag along while I am on this journey through PEI. And anyone that is listening to this, I hope that it illuminates what may be going on in my mind, the way that I'm thinking about how I'm arranging things and how things are, or why things are included as symbols and all that in my next Peillustration. Even though by the time I do my next Peillustration, we may have only just entered the Peillustration phase of this YouTube series. So, long story short, thank you for being here. So on that note, in regards to practicing to find the words for what I do visually, I'm going to do a randomly generated question, which I generated minutes before starting this recording. It says, "What's something that you believe you'll never be able to do well?" This journey is an effort, is in hopes to practice something that I have never thought I could ever have or ever will be good at doing, and that is writing, whether it's out loud or on paper. I have never considered myself a good writer. I am a clinical rambler, but I'm hoping to ramble. I'm hoping to stumble through rambling into a form or a style of writing that I can hone in on and perfect. Maybe. It's all maybe. I really don't know if I'll be able to pull it off through this or if something else will, come about. But I don't think I will ever be a good writer, but that doesn't mean I'm going to not try. I think anything that you believe you can't do, that's something that you should be trying the hardest at. Not can't ethically, but can't like you want to, but can't find yourself being talented or skilled enough or have the mindset to even develop the skill for it. One of the reasons I don't believe I will ever be good at writing is because the reason I do my artwork, the reason I speak through word or through images is because my words don't work. And for some reason, my pictures do a better job of saying what I want to say, or at least it appears that way. I can't seem to hone in on a concise form of speech, and it taps into the idea of a picture holds 1,000 words or speaks for 1,000 words, whatever that cliche is. One picture can capture a multitude of words that I don't have to write. It's almost like a lazy way to write. Or it's like I'm overwriting, or I'm writing it all, but I'm not focusing on the real message, or I'm leaving the message up to the viewers, even though there is something that I would like to say written in between the lines. I tend to just leave the viewers to extrapolate any words that come up naturally as they look at it. The words, it's almost like looking at a word puzzle, like a crossword puzzle, where you see a bunch of like gobbledygook, and then you find a word in there, but you can find a million words in a crossword puzzle, but you find that one word that stands out, and that's kind of what I'm doing with my viewers. But I hope that I can do some of the extra work that I feel like I've been lazy not doing, and I hope to find the words, all of the words that stand out to me, so that I can write some sort of message that describes what I mean by all of this, what I want from all of this, so that I can do better at writing a storyboard or a script for what my movie pictures are about. I've been a silent film for too long. So that's our question and answer segment. Now is our purposefully stupid art pun section, so that I can shake off some of the chips on my shoulder that make me think too seriously about art. It's a habit of mine to do. So we're going to break this habit as a form of rebuilding new habits, however stupid it sounds. Here's the pun. What should you do if you find art imprisoned? You have to free the art. Moment of silence. Okay, moving on. So we are now working on finding the words for the creature of habit drawing. Oddly enough, the creature of habit drawing came after the previous work, which was the Mind Palace, which was the castle built from habitual practices, compulsory actions. But it wasn't until after I had built this said palace, shown in episode 10, that I thought at the time that I should excavate the thought process that would make the person I mentioned before, this higher self, want to assemble this castle, like almost like a sand castle, for lack of a better word, because he's kind of bigger, larger than life. He would never be able to fit themselves in this castle, and you don't really know if they are building it or destroying it at any given time. So as I was trying to make sense of what this figure was thinking while they were grabbing the dragon discussed in previous pieces, and they appeared to be simultaneously building and destroying the Mind Palace that they wanted to find solace in, I just didn't understand what they were thinking at the time. Like, what could make a person act that way while they're trying to find a place of mental rest? Why are they doing all of this? And it made me think about the habits that I had up until that point, the habits that I was trying to build at that point, what I was hoping to accomplish from said habits, what habits I had that were subconscious, that I didn't have a reign over yet. And it made me think of myself in many instances as this creature of habit, that there was this entity in the mind of that higher self that higher self couldn't quite see at the time, which is why they were acting almost impulsively or compulsory or compulsively, whatever. See, words. Like it was a figure, almost like the voice in your head. Like, you can't really see it, and people hardly even listen to them, nonetheless recognize them as a intraterrestrial being that is responsible for the things that your body winds up doing. And I wanted to draw a picture of that creature that was living in my mind and was at the root of my confusion. I was hoping to identify that creature so that maybe I could trim the edges and clean them up so that they could not build habits that were unseen and uncontrolled, but build practices that were not intentional, but had a sense of purpose. And I'm not going to say that I was able to trim, or at this time, that while drawing the creature habit, that I was able to do what I set out to do, but at the very least, I did identify that voice in my head, and I gave them, or at least one of the facets of the community of voices in my head, I gave them a corporeal, iconic self that I could look at and question. Art is all about pulling out unseen things so that you can see and question, administer thought with reference. You'll notice I started this journey with a lot of images that implied myself as this main character, because I was hoping to understand myself. I know I began this community or this series with a sense of community, but the person that lived on top of said community in episode 2, or no, episode 5, I don't know, the one with the cheese dog springs, with the big butt and the droopy oil dripping down and the oil rig on top. Like what was on top was a representation of myself looking over top of the community, trying to understand where I stand. But as this series continues, I start incorporating more and more the figures that were surrounding me that I felt resonated with certain topics that I was trying to extrapolate from my mind to understand myself better through understanding how another affects me, using others as a form of self-reflection. But in the act of self-reflection, I was, whether I realized it at the time or not, I was very immature thinking this way, but I also was learning how to observe my community more closely with some sort of intent to understand them on many levels. It may have started with the hopes of understanding myself, but as a result of understanding myself, or that intent to understand myself more closely, I was able to build the habit of investigating others in a similar way. But at the time, I had a roommate who, at this very moment in time, I bonded with. We had a terrible falling out where there was a some sort of mistrust that came from either one of our insecurities. I really don't know what really happened in the falling out, but that's besides the point. That's meta, it has no real correlation to this story. It's like shrapnel knowledge. But at this moment in time, the way that I saw this colleague, I'll say, was he appeared to be very much lost in their habitual practice or lack thereof. They were a animal. They didn't seem to be very civilized, not as a human. Like they worked well with society, but they also denied society. They like worked well with their denial of society, and it just felt like they stood for this very animalistic representation. And I felt like when I saw him with his long, like thick, like greasy dreadlocks and clothes that he hadn't washed very often, and what his priorities were, I felt like I was seeing the voice in my head that was responsible for some of my more chaotic invitations. Like, if I were to imagine the voice in my head and my problems with it, it would look a lot like this character. He's not taking care of himself all too well, but that's where he's happy. It's not any sort of insult to the way that they live, but it wasn't the way that I wanted to continue living. And I identified it in the way that they functioned, and I was like, oh my gosh, if my mind looks like that, I have a lot of work to do. But that's all based on my standards. that I was learning to have. I was, whether I saw it in the way I presented myself or not, I was very much wook in the way that I walked around and held myself and prioritized things in the world. I may have had short hair, but I was, in my mind, very much nappy headed and greasy and unwashed and untrimmed. Um, I had really let the vines grow and the weeds grow. So I took a picture of him without him knowing. I think he was probably just like my mind was assuming. I fooled my mind in the same way to get this reference, but he probably thought I was doing it out of admiration, like I wanted to honor his presence, but I really just wanted to make this, grab a photo of him to refer to this like troll gremlin type creature that I was close with at the time. I mean, we shared laughs, we shared secrets, we shared the ways we were thinking, like, and we also shared a falling out and arguments. And as much of a friend he was also a friend because of something that I saw in him, in myself. And I'm pretty sure it may have been vice versa, or he could have just been taking advantage of me at the time, like many old friends have. I could be very gullible in that sense. But I mean, I was also almost taking advantage of him for my own purposes here, and that could, in a way, may have been like the catalyst for again, I'll use the word over and over, extrapolating the habits that were unseen or not investigated more, like the habits of how you treat others, how you are treated, and what you accept. Those are all habits that you build. But in reference to the previous piece, in the Mind Palace, you see the outcome of the habits, what the creature of habit has helped build. They may have not had a hand directly in assembling all the habits and what purpose they would hold for the higher self, but they had a direct hand in what they filled the structure with that would be assembled by the higher self. Oh, hype train's gonna come by. Okay, so here, as you noticed from my last piece, the Mind Palace is constructed out of doobies. And in previous pieces, the doobies were initially represented as a form of building up to a point. And with every habit, you build up to a point. And with all of the habits, you start building this pile of points that you're making. Whether you acknowledge the reasons for them or not, you are either consciously or subconsciously or unconsciously building these points based off of reactions or compulsions. And the creature of habit is just incessantly building, rolling up, taking what's directly around them, unfiltered, and rolling it up into points of life, points of purpose, points of ignorance. And they're focused entirely on just wrapping it up into a nice thing for the mind to interpret later on. They don't care really what it takes. They're just caring about the process of assembling the point from their triggers, their sensory triggers that trigger them to respond accordingly. That's kind of why he's sitting upon it. He is directly related, or he's almost another natural element in this forest of buds. And they don't see a difference between them and the nature they're a part of. They roll up these points just like the tree grows. They're like very much not in a like an ugly way, but they're very much troll-like in their connection with nature. Lack of any sort of separation that could civilize them in a way. Not saying that it's even possible to separate yourself literally from nature. We are all part of nature, but to have some form of yourself that can rise above and see where that part of nature stands among nature, like they're sitting upon, in this case, they're sitting upon a fallen tree in this little pocket where they have been knocking down trees and rolling up, and it's like this bald spot of observation where in life, like all these trees, this forest kind of implies a place for experience, a place with substance, and all around you there's untouched realms of substance to enjoy, experiences to have, and you sit upon your own direct experience, this fallen tree, and around you is any form of life you have already lived. You have chopped the tree down, you've made something of it, you've processed it, you've rolled it up, and you continue to deforest the experience. It almost makes me think of how monks don't care to participate in experience, because in a way, like as you participate in experience, you are kind of chopping down a tree of life to process, and to build something else from, which can be traumatic to nature. It's hard to say what really is good for nature, but if you're not touching it, if you're not constantly interacting with it in this intentional way, you aren't damaging it in any way. You are just one with it. You are one of the trees that has not fallen. You just stand with the universe, and you are that. So, as an artist, I am drawn, pun intended, to produce something, to construct through destruction. I destroy the world around me, not physically but mentally, to break it apart, to understand it further, and in the effort of understanding it further, I learn its nature and how I think it could be reapplied to transform nature into a new form of itself. However traumatic it may be for nature, I'm not sure. At this very moment, I was very much deconstructive in regards to nature. I was tearing things apart to understand, and I was addicted to that process, like a person taking apart a radio to understand why the messages are sent, rather than just living with that science. On a more physical, surface level, aesthetic sense, all of the trees that you see here are nuggets, untouched symbols for life, standing undisturbed. This forest of buds. Each bud is a different bud. None of them are the same nugget. I drew just like the expressions in this character's face and the textures of their wrinkled pants and the construction of their fingers and toes. I referenced the full body of the nuggets, as if each one stood on their own as an entity, as a figure themselves, but they had not fallen into this creature of habit. They were just there to be themselves in all their glory. And as a creature of habit, I sat there on my fallen tree, and a part of me always admired these undisturbed elements, but in a way, admiration of the undisturbed is a form of disturbing your environment. I think that's why the trees have fallen, and as I have admired one tree, it was disturbed, processed, rolled up, and then taken to the mind palace to rebuild or build extensions of how I saw the world, my world, the inner world, the outer world, the unseen world, whatever, all of the dimensions. But always remember that every time I do draw these textures, I am tapping into this pareidolia phenomenon of things being seen within the structures of the world. Like the whole world is ambiguous out of context. Within context, you reason with the world, but out of context, much of the world can be misconstrued, confused for something else. And my textures have, as much as they closely referenced real textures, and I try to stay be as accurate to the reference in this style of rendering in black and white to this degree. I also recognize that in the process of replicating these textures, like replicating the folds of t-shirts, I was inviting these cloud formations to expose or capture these scenes that appeared in random, and depending, like the Rorschach, depending on how you feel, certain things would emerge. Like these are all like crowds of people, but they're literally nuggets, foliage, crumpled dried foliage that holds substance, which I think life in a way does. It's a crumpled foliage of universal construct that we find meaning in, and holds psychoactive substance like THC in this case, but symbolically perspective, experience. And there are all sorts of strains, of course. They all have different psychoactive effects, which refers to what in life there is to admire. Like you admire because of differences. The differences in life are what provide rarity or beauty. You admire what stands apart from the other. So the strains and their specific profiles are symbolic to the range of existence. And it's crazy. They're all like fingerprints. Like no one nug is the same, obviously. Like they're all a completely different arrangement of wrinkled foliage. I mean, you could see here this little person is reaching out from the foliage to touch the void. It's kind of like a little symbol for, as much as existence exists, a part of it always wants to return back to the source, which is always referred to as this void space where all life emerges from. And I kind of, it looks like it's just another shrapnel of leaf sticking out from the bud, but if you look closely, it has the halo like all these other little figures, and one little arm, which looks like any sort of wrinkle or hair of these buds, just sticking out to touch. the untouched. And like almost doesn't want to necessarily be there, but it's stuck to it. I wish I could get a better picture of this to share while I'm speaking, to show how detailed these gradients of line are, so you can really get the full effect of how much I was really closely admiring the world, but also how catastrophic that is in reference to the admiration being the source of much of my problems or life's problems. Like, the more you admire, the more existence takes a hold on you. And the more existence takes a hold on you, the more unconsciously or subconsciously you build habits around those admirations. For example, addictions. You admire the way something makes you feel, or the way something makes you observe the world, and you get addicted to inviting that substance into your life, and now you have built a habit around admiration for something. Or even the opposite, something can make you not see something, and that's what you enjoy to experience, and you build a habit around admiring the lack of existence. You almost can't escape habitualizing life, which makes me even more want, like, that I want to even more to gain a hold, a better relationship with the creature of habit. If they're always going to exist within me, how can I better serve or understand or collaborate coherently with that creature? Like, how can I civilize them so that we can speak with one another? Like, I feel like the creature of habit speaks a different language, so that they're always going to be misunderstood until you share a connecting bond through communication. And this was me initiating the conversation. Like, I built the space where I recognize them. And that's very important to do when you are trying to get to know somebody. You build the space of acceptance. You recognize them as someone worth, maybe not worth, but just for them to be somebody that you care for, in a way where you acknowledge them as someone to experience, as someone to potentially admire, and you listen. You provide that space to understand one another. And this drawing was my effort. Whether I had to acknowledge that they weren't who I had hoped they had been. I'm talking about myself. Like, I was not who I had hoped. But it takes inviting that person into your immediate vicinity of observation to recognize that, and to not offend them, but to get to know them, and to hopefully assimilate both of your mental structures, your mental cultures, in a way, so that you can work together to build a place with one another that serves both your purposes. Also, I really like that in this place, the void around that surrounds this piece. And just like the other piece, this piece is floating. It's right next to me. It's floating in a big void. There's a whole lot of space. I cropped it for the sake of a better resolution in this canvas size on my computer, but there's a larger space that surrounds this piece. So there's a huge film or veil of the void. And as this intention to create the space emerges, it kind of breaks the void apart so that the space kind of peeks through But I sort of imagine, just like you would imagine, like a thin film of fog, kind of uh, like that your head almost peaks above in like a graveyard. It sets this mood where it's this thin atmospheric fog that meanders around the gravestones and through the fences and around the trees. This veil of existence has that same ephemeral quality that, as distance fills like the gap between what you stare at, the film becomes denser and you can't see past a certain range. It's less ephemeral, but the closer you are to it, the more you would, the closely, in an analogical way, uh, the closer you are to a subject, like my creature of habit in this case, the more you see through the film of reality, of this void, and the farther from that diameter of recognition, the more dense it is, the less you see, the less emerges through. It becomes mysterious. And I imagine this, like what you see here, could be a forest of existence, a forest of things worth, not worth, but that can be admired. Whether they should or not is up to you. Underneath the film, like there's a blanket that canopies other trees that could be extending beyond this diameter of awareness. Uh, it's like, I feel like if you were to see this piece not from an angle as it is, but from directly above, it would look like almost like the shape of the iris of the eye. And where the iris of the eye cares to, or I guess in this case it would be a third eye, where that third eye that is responsible for a higher self awareness, wherever that third eye cares to observe in this sheet of like of existence, that awareness points itself and helps a certain part of existence emerge and expose itself from the void, because you are closer to that in terms of investigative intent. But then as you move your eye, this place of awareness, to another place in the sheet of a void, the fog fills over that again, and you only have the ephemeral memory of what you learned from, in this case, the habits that you built. And you may forget where you got those habits, because now you're staring at a new place in this film of mystery that is the world we live in. But also, at this point, I had hoped that at any given moment I was jotting down landscapes of self-awareness, so that in time my diameter for self-awareness could get larger and larger and larger through knowledge of the self, so I didn't have to see it exactly to understand it. And my diameter for self-awareness would be a lens of knowledge of the self, like you see a map of marked landscapes and measurements to understand a realm, but you could be standing in a enclosed vacuum of a box and still understand the place that you are getting to know with the map. And through self-awareness of this creature of habit and where they roamed in my forest and what they left behind or didn't leave behind, I was making marks to build this map to study later on. And I mean, whether I accomplished it or not, I had hoped to build a map to roam more easily and with more confidence, not so I would not get lost as easily in myself. and the ambiguity of life experience and the power of perspective and opinions to define that experience. Also, as I was studying like the forms of habit building, I was trying to understand the intent behind a habit, like the inspiration of doing something, what it meant to you, and I pulled in all the little figures that were appearing in the castle. Like there's some that go and rest in the castle after they have done their work. It's like where these figures would go to relax, where they don't have to do so much work. They just are there to be aware of themselves in the mind palace. But here they are more animate, and they are responsible for what they bring to that castle, that palace. But I was trying to tap into all these multifaceted roles that you can play in developing patterns of self-construction. So there were parts of me that were trying to be grounded. So one is sitting on the floor of this bed, and they're holding the same position as another part of themselves that is kind of rising above and or trying to see themselves from a higher place. And this person that's grounded is taking hold of that sense of self. But even that sense of self that is a little higher, you can see a little smoke coming from their hands, they are grabbing onto another part of themselves that's unseen, which might even be this piece itself. Like they're gripping onto the piece that this person they're not even aware that they are sitting upon. Like the concept of where they sit, this person is grabbing that. So there was this conversation between what it is to be grounded and what it is to be lifted, and that relationship with one another, and what habits could form from that. There's another one that's on their own, staring into the darkness of the void, what's underneath, what hasn't been exposed. They are not caught up with the process. They are trying to understand what we are extrapolating from the process by looking into the unlit realms of self-awareness. That built different habits of curiosity. Then you have the forms of myself that are working diligently to take down the next level of self-awareness, to chop a tree down so that they can pick it apart, process it, and build something from it. There were parts of me that these two are sawing. They're doing like that double saw. And I'm always a dualistic person. I jump from one perspective to the other, and I constantly am in a form of conflict, because I may think one way, but then I think an opposing way to converse with that one way, and then they bounce back and forth between what is really true. And as a result, they saw this purpose, like, no, it's this, no, it's that, no, it's this, no, it's that, no, it's this. And in the act of those habits, I end up chopping something down, whether I realize it or not, and that becomes something that's rolled up into, all of these points that the creature of habit mindlessly rolls up. It's just what falls before them. It's the tree that's most accessible. Then there's parts of me that, and I say me, but you might be connecting. It could be your me that might relate to these multifacets of the self. But at the time, I'm trying to understand myself. And these two parts, they dropped a tray of what they have collected from the forest. and one isn't freaking out. They're like, oh, let's just pick it up, put it back on the tray, and continue. But then there's another part of myself that thinks it's the end of the world. They can't believe it happened. What are we going to do? How do we do this? How can we avoid this? And there's the habits of confidence for a solution and fear for the lack thereof a possible solution, like absolute despair or panic. Then you have the same intent, but they find a means of teamwork. Like when you work together with yourself, you build functional, efficient processes. They're less habit and they're more practice. That was an important part to recognize. But then in that, there's a person that's not working with anybody and they're just one foot standing on the pile. They're just admiring the pile. Like all the things, there's a part of me that's sitting and just, taking it in. They're not doing any work. They're just, the work they're doing is admiring the work. I feel like these two should have been working together, because this part of me, and yang is always the part of me that's working. And I represent them as these masculine figures because I feel like it's a form of toxic masculinity to constantly overwork yourself, to be workaholics. And regardless of your gender, you can have toxic masculinity where you're working super hard out of insecurity. It's not to say you are a man or a woman. They're just tapping into the, I guess, more immature visuals or symbols for how I personify the yin and the yang being kinetic and the yin being potential. But this yang is spending their time like they should be providing the papers to this pile so that this creature of habit has the means of rolling up the substance. But they are sitting there admiring the community of the yin. And in the yin, there are all of these women or feminine figures that are taking care of one another. They are connecting with one another. They are at peace with one another. They don't see that any of this work really needs to be done, or the real work has to be done with one another, and you can accomplish more peaceful and graceful and forgiving and vulnerable in the best way connections with yourself without having to do all of this. So I really like this hearth space around this fire that's at the center of all of this. And there's a part of my yang that could be working with the other yang to get more work done, but they are sitting trying to understand what's going on here. Like, how could they not be doing anything? How do they feel at peace just with themselves? And I think that's a very powerful attribute in the yin energy. Also, you'll see all these different, like my cat, who appears a lot. They're either observing or they're playing with yarn, which is technically just a black spot with a little line coming from it, which is very resemblant of all of this. Let's say all of these points of reflection are a ball of yarn with string that I'm playing with visually, and the cat's there like playing with a piece of the puzzle and fascinated with it. Here's another group where they're working, but you could see one, like they stop for a moment, and in order to maintain this habit of working, one holds one leg up to replace the hand and passes a joint to the other. So they're like, hey, let's take a quick break while we stand here and catch our breath, represented through the puff, and then we'll get back to it. It takes rest to continue work, which is kind of what this little part is about. But in a way, it takes work, like lifting one knee to replace the hand that does the work. It takes work to invite a place of rest, to continue working. Like it's kind of counterintuitive, and this guy's just sitting there admiring that. Like you could just be sitting around, but you're to relax, but you're relaxing mid work, and I do that a lot habitually. It's one of my worst habits. Is I even in modes of relaxation, I'm working towards something else. I don't really know how to relax. Even nowadays, like I've been dreaming more, and I go to bed to relax, but I wind up excited for my dreams. Like I'm like, all right, let's get some other work done. Let's see what dreams happen, so that I wake up with this strange subconscious energy that will fuel my mornings, that spark the engine and get it running. Even rest is about work, and I want to make sure I rest enough so that I can work more the next day. Also, you'll see this pile I mentioned earlier, that the creature of habit is mindlessly gathering. Um, Even if it's mindless, there is a method to the madness. They have a pattern, like the habit itself builds pattern, and they kind of build this pyramid of structure, and these other parts, like the work doesn't end with cultivation and transportation of goods, like to the creature of habit. After the creature of habit has done what it's done, out of habit, these other figures need to carry their point that was rolled up to the realm of the mind palace, to help rebuild parts that were burnt away, or to build extensions where more space could be invited to compartmentalize something else in the mind palace. And I find it pretty interesting that there's two dualistic figures that have lit 2 points, two maybe even opposing points, and those 2 points trail off in smoke to make the contour of the path that will lead this figure to the other place in the void. Like it takes two to tango. Like it takes two opposing sides, not in conflict, but two, like you can see with the peripheral and your focus what's in front of you, but then someone standing behind you looking the other direction covers the ground of what one person can't see, and together you have a well-rounded view of your environment. So together they work to light these points to guide this figure to that other place that bleeds through a mysterious void, so that they can walk through the void and then emerge in a new realm of awareness, which is the mind palace that came before this. Like this was all me trying to understand what built the mind palace. Again, you have two resting the pan. They're not in a big rush, but then that's like a me building habits of a form of laziness or procrastination, and they're blowing. One's just relaxing, and one's blowing O's. Like one's an active relax, and the other's just a casual relax. I just like always covering two angles of the same thing. Here we have a fallen tree, the tree that maybe came just before this, and there's a community of them, these little figures that are, picking apart at the tree, grabbing a chunk of this ambiguous space that could be anything, this potential energy for all things, and putting it in a little pan so they could take a piece of all things to the pile so that the creature of habit can roll up. I also like, there's the pile, there's the means, and there's the result. There's the cultivation, and there's the goal. And here we have this big pile of stems. What parts of self investigation that cannot be used, but in order to be used, like if you were to try to make something out of these stems for consumption, you have to do a very, I guess, I don't know if it's the right word, but an extracurricular step to extract what is left from the bones of this process to make maybe a tea, like a THC-based tea, if you boil down the stems. That is possible, but here they're just kind of piling up, at this point, the waste of processing your environment. There's always some sort of leftover. It's almost like a little boneyard, but no one's really touching that. Here we have the kitty. He's sleeping, but I also don't know I don't remember if this character was collapsed or sleeping, or if they felt like a waste of the process, like they were blending in with one of the stems of the trees, or I guess the trunks in this case. And I think it was referring to how I felt sometimes in the midst of my habits, where I don't know why I'm doing all this. I'm exhausted, and there's points where because of my habits, I am extremely exhausted and I collapse. And I almost feel like a outcome of the process, like a piece of the waste that's left. Like I have used up my energy, and now I am simply the stem that is left in the process. I don't know if any of y'all have ever felt that way, where you're just what's left over. Sometimes sleep is the best way to rejuvenate that potential energy again. Without sleep, without this or a deeper sense of rest and recovery, you will never be more than a stump again. You will never be able to regrow. You will reside in this boneyard of waste, hoping to dissolve, to hopefully have another part of yourself emerge from within the dissolved remnants of your exhaustion. But then there's another part of myself that goes to handle that waste. There are two pieces that are trying to carry stems out of this space, so it's not like not a priority, but not a that this sense of waste doesn't take up space. Like they're going to go process this waste and try to make something of it. But here we have two figures that are trying to carry it, and the cat was walking on top. He jumped on top of that remnants of exhaustion to try to jump and catch the void. And the cat's always this symbol for curiosity, and in the process of jumping on this twig in the effort to, manage some sort of usefulness from this piece of waste, they knocked the twig down, the stem down, and it fell on top of the foot of one of the parts of myself that is trying to do its best to carry this heavy waste, this what seems to be useless waste, to where it could serve better. And as a result, it's not always an easy process. There are many variables, and you almost feel like it's not worth processing the waste, like recycling that exhausted energy. And having it stub your toe does not help. And this other character is just like, he just let go, stepped away, he's smoking his joint, he's just like, oof. All right, so are we doing this? Like, and they're carrying it off into this void, like hoping to maybe throw it in a pile so it can dissolve in another place and then emerge as the third eye of awareness. Travels around the void. It may come back into a spot that was a slash and burn zone, like a regrowth area where all of the remnants of this process was given a chance to reform and become new life, new potential energy. And they have these two yang characters holding hands coming from that void, and they're pointing at their intent to take more of this. They're talking about like how much good they're doing. Like, this is a good thing to do. This isn't a waste of energy. They saw what it has done underneath the veil, this mystery, and that has almost bonded them in a way where they're at peace with the process, rather than these two who are at odds end with the process. And also, I kind of imagine like a major visual connection between this piece and the last piece, the Mind Palace, is I imagine that character that's holding the dragon, responsible for building it or destroying it or doing both simultaneously, has this thought bubble that is responsible for who, what, when, why, where, how they are doing the thing they're doing, and you get an idea of what's going on in their head, their thought bubble. And as I was producing this, I was trying to think of a place to make that connection, and I formed this point, which is, it's a space that was exposed through constantly walking back and forth between this realm of the creature of habit and this void space that connects all things to the rest of the universe, the rest of existence. And it points in this way that, to me, resembles like that classic bubble with the point that comes out of it that points towards the head that's responsible for speaking that bubble, what's in that bubble. So this creature of habit is within the thought bubble of the ruler of the Mind Palace. And I almost think that all of these figures that are dividing up the roles of habit building is the text that is written within the bubble of thought. So yeah, I think that's a good place to end this episode 11. And after this piece, we have a pretty fun drawing to travel over to. It's going to be quite a journey to make sense of and connect the dots, but I'm excited to take that journey. As of now, these have all been very illuminating to put into words and listen back to. I hope it's been, a similar effect for anyone that's watching, listening. And as per usual, let's end this episode with another Peibi Playhouse episode. And before I go, I wanted to make sure I wish you a good day. And I say this because I don't know when you're seeing this or if it even matters. It's a general intent to just wish at any given moment in time that this is happening, that I wish that you have a good day, a good night, and a good time in general. Peace. Girl,
One thing for sure, super certain. None of these bitches is worth it. Baby, I'm awesome, I'm perfect. Be careful who you telling your secrets. Never know who you could beef with. Same one you calling yo bro, be the same one leaking out all your deepest secrets. Never can't feel it, just peep shit. Don't talk about it, just beat it. Coming straight from the rectum knee shit. She got a man, but I'm the one she wanna be with. Why? Cause they love my new song, it's on replay. So she wanna come hang by the DJ. We run through the band like a relay. I ain't got no sleep in like 3 days. But I've been smoking and drinking. Don't know what the fuck I've been thinking. Trying to capture the moment, I'm not blinking. Swoosh me up, baby. Swoosh me up, baby. Swoosh me up, baby.